All right, let's check into tall buildings in a single bound and stuff in Providence.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
So I think we have a pretty nice skyline in the city of Providence. Right in the middle, though, it's kind of like a kid when he loses his two front teeth. You know, the Superman building, like the two front teeth that are, if it ever goes down, they're going to be permanently out. But right now they're just kind of dark because he doesn't brush. How's that for disgusting? But you know what I mean? It's got... it doesn't look very good. And so at night, you know, the lit up Superman building is hardly ever. And in the meantime, we've got this new residential proposal, which is got this big, tall building that'll be kind of off the skyline, but create the skyline. I got Dan McGowan in here tonight to talk about it, and we'll line that conversation up momentarily. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in. Great to have you aboard. Donald Trump has been still busy trying to create a mess on aisle 5. It just seems to keep on going. With the latest from CBS, please.
Protests against President Trump in New York last night, anger over a number of usual issues, but Russia is getting new attention. All after the president's summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin and whether the president confronted Putin over election meddling. He now tells CBS News he holds Putin responsible.
Well, I would, because he's in charge of the country, just like I consider myself to be responsible for things that happen in this country. So certainly, as the leader of a country, you would have to hold him responsible, yes.
But that was on the same day the president generated more controversy during a cabinet meeting when he was asked whether Russia continues to meddle.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank you very much.
Let's go.
That appeared to run counter to U.S. intelligence leaders who say Russia is still at it. So the White House later said the president wasn't really answering that question.
He had a chance to speak with the president after his comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions.
The Democrats continue to focus on the president's shifts, with calls for investigations that could wind up entangling the U.S. translator in Helsinki.
I believe the Senate Foreign Relations Committee should hold a hearing with the American translator, who was present during President Trump's and President Putin's private meeting.
You know, it's really funny. The White House must be like this. Oh, okay. Let's do the wooden thing. Roll the tape back. See where he says would? What if he had said wouldn't? Somebody play that. Ed wouldn't, right? That was 2 days ago. Now the president says no to the question from a reporter about Russia still planning to meddle with us. They roll the tape back and they can see it, but they say, oh, no. What he was saying is no more question. It's like, you know, clean up on aisle 5, and as they're cleaning up on aisle 5, they're saying nothing spilled. Like they know there's also, like everything spilled on aisle 5, and they're cleaning it up while you're watching them clean it up, and they're saying, what spill on aisle 5? What are you talking about? It's the strangest thing I've ever seen this whole last couple of weeks. And I guess it's just going to be a lot of cleanup in aisle 5. They're going to have some extra dish rags, I guess. All right, let's get to the local. I don't know what else to say about this thing right now. It's all I can come up with. Don't blame me. It's not like you're coming up with anything. We're all kind of like, what? Providence. That is a really weird looking building. Sorry. Here's the latest from Eyewitness News.
Rhode Island residents rising up against the proposed Hope Point Tower.
This one guy wants to put up this tall building and block everybody else's views.
The proposed building at 600 feet would be the tallest in the Ocean State. The developer hopes to get to work on the old I-195 land. But a 130-foot height limit is slowing down plans. But the city is considering raising the maximum for the project. However, following hours of testimony, the City Council Ordinance Committee voted to recommend to deny the zoning change. The fate of the change now moves to the full council.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build an iconic building in the city of Providence and bring economic development and people back into the city.
City Hall was packed Wednesday as labor unions showed their support for the project.
My stance is clear. You see 100, 200 people here, they want a job.
Others worry all this controversy will drive others away from joining the skyline.
We're spending too much time on a project that really doesn't pencil out, that has no market study, that meets none of the guidelines, and it's ridiculous that we're spending so much time on this.
You never get the labor unions to say anything negative about building a building. And you got to give them credit, Danny, because they are about jobs.
Right.
They have one job. It's to talk about jobs.
Yeah, they never oppose it unless somebody doesn't commit to union work. That's where the
and that's a bad building.
Right.
That's got nothing to do with what it looks like. It's got to do with who's making it.
That's when City Hall starts to.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Sabatoni, who was in that package, the first guy that you saw, the union guy. I enjoy him, and hopefully we can get him in next week to talk about this. He's, they're not. By the way, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
They are not the people you go to for a fair evaluation about whether or not a building ought to be constructed in the city.
Right.
Right?
No, totally. I think that's a very fair point. I suppose the flip side would be the folks who are from the neighborhoods who simply don't maybe like the design of it or don't like the idea that it might be too tall. I think you have to question their role in this too, right? If you're the city council, I think, and not just the city council, but state and city leaders, but right now the council, you do have to look at this holistically, right? You have a potential investment that they say would be between $250 and $300 million in a city that desperately needs it, that's always looking for more tax revenue. I think you have to look at that. Then you have to look at sort of the way the rules of the game are played, which is what's being questioned right now. The idea that you would give one developer a maximum height variance up to 600 feet, which is 6 times the current limit, right? So that's the argument from the opposition side, that they shouldn't do this.
Give me the history on this, and this guy all of a sudden thinking that this skyscraper belongs here.
Well, remember,
by the way, I'm not opposed to it. I couldn't be more interestedly ambivalent.
Mm-hmm.
That's an oxymoron?
But I get the point, and I think the viewers do.
It's kind of like as a Giant fan watching the Patriots and the Jets kick the living daylights out of each other. I want to see the outcome, but I'm not really invested.
Exactly. Well, I am invested because I cover it. But
then again, I'm not uninvested because who wants to see some kind of ridiculous skyline in the city of Providence?
Sure. So the history.
So tell me the history.
So the history. Remember back about 2.5 years ago, this developer, his name's Jason Fane. He's a New York guy. Got kind of recruited, wooed here by the 195 Commission, the state. They said I don't know how that happened, but they got him here. He took a look at this. He said,
"I need 2 buildings, right?"
He initially proposed 3. It was, I think, as councilman at the time, council president Louis Saponte dubbed it the 3 Towers of Terror, which pretty much killed it right away. And it was this idea of 2 smaller but still very tall towers, and then 1 very large tower. It was universally, aside from the unions and kind of Senate President Ruggiero, who generally supports the unions, generally panned. People didn't really like it. He said, okay, I'll come back to you. He comes back with this 46-story tower. It's the beginning of this year to say, this is what I want to do. Same property. I just will build 1 very tall, the tallest building in Rhode Island. He's called it sensuous. He thinks it's a beautiful building. And
it's weird.
It does look, aesthetically, it's not my cup of tea, I would say.
Just, Eric, put that picture up again, will you, if you would. I appreciate you throwing that up there in the conversation, but I mean, it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing that
in the middle of if it's in Midtown Manhattan and it's like strangely shaped, perfect. See how that thing moves up?
Right. Very tall.
You go, hey, there's a unique building. Okay. But it looks like a World Expo Disneyland type of weird thing in the middle of nowhere type of thing. And why is it? I think people drive by and go, hey, how come that building's bent?
Right. I do think, in fairness, though, what the developer would likely say is if you do that, it's the if you build it, people will come kind of thing. Maybe there will be more development. So if you say, look, we'll take the chance on the first 550-foot building, maybe people will build. You know, if that picture looks different, if there are a bunch of, say, 300-foot buildings also built around it, which is possible.
The architecture aside, what's the business plan? I mean, what are the economic guarantees? Who's going in there?
So he thinks this is largely residential.
I'm not a big height guy, so I'm not going up the top. That's for sure.
Maybe look down, drop a penny or something.
Like, whoa, this thing is bent. Whoa.
He thinks that there's a market, and I would say, while I haven't seen a study that shows exactly this, there certainly is a demand for more downtown living. There's all kinds of projects happening right now, generally on the micro loft side, but more, wealthier folks who want to live in cities. I think he thinks that if you build townhouses and condos and some apartments, there will be a market for it. But it does, you're right, I mean, it's so big and so much bigger than anything else happening. I do think that there are fair questions. Some of the developers have really criticized this, major names like Dick Galvin, the guy who helped build South Street Landing. Buff Chase has been critical, and what they're kind of saying is, we don't see the market for this, and what their fear is that a project starts, you sell that land, and they're going to buy it on the cheap because it's 195 land, and halfway through the project, he flips it off, he sells it, maybe nothing happens with it, and maybe the developer makes off with, even if it's a loss, not a major loss, and we suddenly in Providence have an empty or a half-empty building, and I think that's a real concern from serious people. A guy like Buff Chase is not somebody who's...
All right, when we come back, we'll finish up this conversation by talking about how do you guarantee that doesn't happen. And Dan's got some other stuff going on in the city we got to check in with. Stay with us. Just finishing up with Dan on this conversation about this Fane Tower project. We don't know exactly what he's thinking about pricing out his units for.
No, that's right. There's not. We haven't heard exactly what he thinks these things will go for. What we know is we know that investment that he says he wants to make between $250 and $300 million. We know they think it'll generate in the end about $4 million in tax revenue every year. But we don't know unit prices. We don't know what it would mean. The economy's booming right now. Who knows what it means 15 years from now?
What financial instruments are potentially available to prevent that disaster that some are saying could happen, a half-built property or not built property or a flip property or any of those things?
So this is a huge question that I still haven't got an answer from the state on, because remember, the one of the reasons this land is so desirable, other than the developer can say I love the land, but the real reason the land is so desirable is that the 195 commission is selling it to him on the cheap, right? Which is what they do with all of that land. So he's got fairly cheap land. Now he wants to build it. The question is, do you do a tax break? The city already has a tax break program in place for all of the 195 land. What there aren't though a lot of mechanisms to say, like, if this thing doesn't get built, you have to pay it back. They don't do a lot of that stuff, and so there is risk going forward. There definitely is.
All right. Last night, though, the committee from the city council thumbs down.
In a little bit of a surprise move, they recommended to vote it down, which means it now goes to the full council, which gives some folks, the ability to potentially change their vote, things like that. So we should.
Do we have a precedent for that, where a committee says no and the council says yes?
Oh yeah, it happens. I mean, oftentimes it's the oftentimes there's recommendation to not approve, and then there's debate on the floor and things change. It is entirely possible that this zoning change will still get approved.
What's Dolores' position on this?
Just like the governor, both of them have kind of said, we really support the process and we support investment. They have not said, if put to a vote, would you vote this up or down? it's an election year, and so they're not exactly commenting on it. I think he supports the idea. I don't know if he wants this exact proposal the way it is.
And who wants it the most? The developer?
I think
or the 195 Commission?
I think the 195 Commission. I think the Senate President really wants it, and of course the construction trades more than anybody. I think they're the ones that want it the most.
All right. Good enough. We have some things going on. What happened with Terry Hassett?
Yeah.
This longtime veteran city councilor.
Yeah.
Didn't get his signatures. It only takes 50.
That's right. It doesn't take
authenticated signatures to run for re-election. What did he do?
He turned in about 57, I believe it was, and 12 of them, yeah, were
you always got to turn in double the number. That's the formula.
Everything I've ever been told.
Double the number.
You turn in double the number. He was facing a very difficult re-election fight. I would have, if I were ranking it, he would have been the most vulnerable council member given his opponent, even if he had qualified to be on the ballot.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, a progressive young woman, 21-year-old, her name's Kat Kerwin, kind of moved into the district very recently, has been around for a while as an activist. I say a while, she's young, but she's a anti-gun activist. Like I said, very progressive, and she moved into the district. I think she knew that Councilman Hassett was probably somebody who had kind of lost touch with that neighborhood. And so she's been working for months and months and months, has raised some money, running a serious, credible campaign.
Isn't there a law against 21-year-old progressives running for office?
You want that law. I don't think it's ever passed.
I'm kidding.
You should have her on, actually. She's
I'm sure she's
interesting
a dynamo.
figure, yeah.
Yeah. I love young people getting into the election process. However, it's a 95-5 ratio of progressive politics versus any other politics in that young people crowd.
That's exactly right.
Young conservatives were hip 15 years ago. You can't find them anywhere anymore.
No, and it doesn't. I'll tell you.
What's that tell us about?
We're seeing a swing of young progressives who are running in Providence right now, both at the state level but also in the city level, and. I think some of the social issues are the reason for it, but what it does is it raises real question about the way government will work. Remember, if you're talking $15 minimum wage, which is a thing that a lot of young progressives like to talk about, are you also focusing on the city's long-term financial problems, right? And if you're talking about kind of more social issues or passing gun ordinances, things like that, is your eye on the ball for a city that is not out of the discussion of bankruptcy, going forward. And so I think it's going to be interesting, depending on how many of these folks get elected, it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic on the city council.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk about residency on two particular matters. Where you live, where you allegedly live, counts. Stay with us. Okay, well, it's not an election season around here unless we have somebody saying you don't live there.
Right.
You say you live there, but you don't live there. In this particular case, this councilwoman who's seeking re-election, Sabina Matos, files a complaint against her opponent, Oscar Vargas, saying he lives in Yorke.
That's right.
He doesn't live in, and her district is what neighborhood now?
She's the Valley Olneyville area.
All right.
Yeah. So the west end.
You don't live here, but the kids, there's a couple of kids?
Yep.
They go to school in Warwick.
At least one kid goes to school in Warwick, yeah.
Living with an ex-wife?
He is the gentleman, Mr. Vargas, his wife, he says they've been separated for about 8 years. His wife has voted from Providence in recent elections, now is registered very recently to vote in Warwick. The child apparently goes to Warwick schools, according to the complaint. So there is at least a question. The thing is,
does he have a mailbox and a front door in Providence?
He does. Yes. Yep. There's a property he owns and he's owned it throughout.
It's not like a post office box. It's
no,
like
it's a real place.
Building.
Yeah. In fact, people testified at a hearing recently that they've been over to that house and had a beer and hung out. So.
Okay.
Makes it very difficult to prove.
Let's put that one aside for a second, and then you got Carnivale, whereas they say on the radio side, Carnivalogy. This is the product, or he is. Well, he's the product of God and his parents, but his story is the product of Eyewitness News and Target 12 and Tim and the team's excellent work. And there he is, got the thing on his face because he's got allergies. He was mowing the lawn that day in Johnston.
Right.
And this is the house that he allegedly lives in Providence. And now the son of a gun is running again as for a rep seat in Providence.
And is endorsed.
And endorsed, well, there's like 3 people on the Democratic City Ward Committee or whatever.
Right,
that's the mailman, the fire guy, and whoever else.
Your friend, your brother.
The guy hanging out at the bus stop. What? But is he still downstairs, going upstairs to use the bathroom? Is that still happening?
I believe he says he now lives on the first floor of the apartment.
Oh, good. So he has full toilet rights to his own home now.
He can use the refrigerator as much as he likes. Yes.
What? What's the big picture on this in terms of proving residency? The Board of Elections is barely able to help itself go to the bathroom, to be honest with you. They don't have an investigative arm to be out there surveilling who's checking in at night, turning out the light in what town, right?
Right. Well, it's incredibly, as we learned in reporting out the John Carnevale story, and I should say, and you get this too, every year around this time, or every election cycle, I should say, we get tip after tip after tip that candidate or councilman or state rep or whatever doesn't live where they say they live. And we do look at many of these tips. It's incredibly difficult to prove because, as we say, that...
What are you going to do, stake him out?
Well, in the famous video of John Carnevale with his face wrapped in a shirt makes for amazing television. It was great TV, won us an Emmy. But that's not what gets him thrown off the ballot, right? It's a mortgage document that we found that said he promised to live outside of the district. Right. It's him asking for parking tickets from a police officer. Those are the things that led to that. It's really
if people
hard.
Don't get that. He asked the last go around. He asked a police officer to ticket him parking in front of his own Providence residence to prove that he lives in Providence.
Yeah.
And the cop was like, "What?"
Yeah, I think Commissioner Perry said in his 30-plus years of law enforcement, he had never heard of such a thing.
Oh, God bless that cop.
Right.
Right. All right. So, will this all work out? We'll both be able to run?
My gut is both will be able to run, and I would say in Carnevale's case, it's hard to imagine he's not the favorite. Yeah, I would say he's the favorite.
He is the favorite.
Yeah.
To take his seat back.
Yeah.
Because people have short memories or no memories.
I think because they don't necessarily.
They don't care.
I don't think they care.
They don't care about this stuff of right and wrong. Right and wrong doesn't really matter. The laws, fair representation.
But it keeps us in business.
Truthfulness, the American way, all of that. It just doesn't matter because it's all fake now, right?
Everything's fake. Everything's fake. That video is real, I promise.
That is? Really? Maybe you guys ought to be on an investigation. Thanks for the update, man.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Dan McGowan on all things Providence. WPRI.com. Don't miss him on TV or online. We'll be right back. Dan reminds me that Carnevale, where he lives, that's a big problem. But he's a big favorite because he's running against the incumbent porn guy. Remember Representative Perez, Ramon, with all his porn notes on the paperwork? It was all a mistake, of course, but it's the silly season, as they call it, right? When we rejoin tomorrow night, we'll take a look at the Supreme Court nomination. We got 2 heavyweight professors from Roger Williams University to evaluate. See you on the radio at 3, too, on WPRO. Thanks for watching.